Hey y'all, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to check out another one of my videos. Today we're going to be talking about the new GlamLite Dirty Martini palette. Now this is one of 4 from their newest collection, but I only picked up this one because obviously there was something about this palette that just drew me in, and I wonder what that was. If you're new around here, it's because it's green and I have this thing with green eyeshadow. I love green eyeshadow. I'm always attracted to an all green palette. So obviously this palette caught my eye and I decided to pick it up and share with you guys my thoughts on it. And in today's video, as you guys saw from the title, I'm going to be comparing it to other palettes I already have in my collection that have a similar enough color story that I wanted to swatch them out side by side so you guys could see for yourself how close it is. I have 10 palettes that I found close enough to this color story. Now none of these are like exact dupes. However, if you have some of these palettes in your collection, you might be able to look at them, compare them to the color story, and see if it's worth it or unique enough for you to want to go out and purchase. Now, I always like to clarify these videos by saying I'm not saying don't buy this palette. However, for those who may not want to be buying this palette but want to see if they can recreate some looks or just if they have those colors already in this collection, that's the main purpose for this video. It's very informative and just to show you guys, you know, how unique the color story is, because I think that's very informative for me when I'm looking at a new palette. I'm curious to see if it's something different than what's already been out or what I already have in my collection. And then at the end of this video, after we do the comparisons, I am going to be giving you guys this look minus the graphic liner. I just popped that on right before sitting down. So the tutorial won't have that included because I didn't record it. So it's going to be a little different than my multiple looks plus review videos, but I want to do something a little different and just see what you guys like. I recently posted a video with my menagerie review. I will go ahead and leave that linked up here, and after this video, I'll also include it down in the description box. But after this video, I would love for you to go check that video out and let me know which type of review you prefer. Do you prefer it to be more focused on the tutorials, or do you like it to be more focused on comparisons and just chit-chatty with my review? Let me know. I'm kind of playing around to see what works best with my schedule, but also what you guys like to see most. So with that intro out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right into comparing it against the 10 palettes that I have right here and see how close this palette is. Alright, so first up, I'm going to compare it to the Beauty Bay Wilderness palette. I got a request for this in my Instagram DM, so I want to make sure I put this one first at the beginning so we can see. But if you are new around here, if you haven't seen this palette, this is what the Beauty Bay palette looks like, or the Beauty Bay Wilderness palette. And then here is what the GlamLite palette looks like. Now, specifically when this was requested, it was for the, you know, the greeny blue top portion, not really the red at all. So keep that in mind. I know the red kind of throws it off of being like, what? That's not even similar. However, if I kind of like spin this around and I go like this, I feel like you can see similarities there a little bit more. So what I'm going to be doing for these comparisons is I'm going to swatch the GlamLite palette out completely on my arm, and then I'm going to pick and choose from the comparison palettes. And I'm only going to swatch shadows that I feel like is comparable enough, and I'll put it next to the shadow that I think dupes the color out. So just some information for you guys as you guys see the swatches on the screen as we go along through this comparison post. But yeah, this palette, I feel like if you look at the shimmers, there's a lot of shimmers between the two palettes that I feel are very similar, as well as the greens. I feel like the blue is too much of a true blue, whereas the GlamLite Dirty Martini palette is more of like a green blue, for them to be very similar. But overall, when you're looking at the feel for both of these palettes, there are a lot of similarities. It's going to depend on you how close you feel like they are, but looking at them side to side, you could get some looks. Definitely, if you have the Wilderness palette and you're wanting to recreate some that you saw from the GlamLite palette, I feel like you can get some pretty close looks to what you could get to the Dirty Martini palette. If you have the Wilderness palette, let me know. Is it close enough that you don't feel like you need to own the Dirty Martini, or did you pick it up like me to have both of them in your collection? Okay, next up, I'm not going to be going in any particular order. I just want to do the Wilderness palette because it was a request, but I also have the Colourpop Star Wars Mandalorian palette. And this one I picked, I know it's like super small and there's not a whole lot in it that is like super similar, but when I was going through my palettes, I was like, if it has at least 4 or 5 shadows that I feel like I can find in the Dirty Martini palette, then I'll swatch it out. And when I was looking at the Colourpop palette, like I could see, you know, the brown in here, the green in here, even the softer greens, and then the shimmers aren't really like any super close dupes, but that more goldy bronzy shade does look like that bronzy goldy shade in the Dirty Martini palette. So there was enough in here, you know, 4 solid colors that I was like, okay, let's go ahead and swatch this out and see exactly how close it is between the two palettes. In case you do have the Mandalorian palette and you were curious, you know, how it compared to some of the tones in the Dirty Martini palette, there you go, now you know. Next up is another Colourpop. This is the At Forest Sight Raw Beauty Christie collab. If you've never seen it, the cover is beautiful. But the inside, when I was really looking at it and going, you know, row by row and looking at the colors, there are a lot of shadows in the Raw Beauty Christie At Forest Sight palette that I thought was close enough to what I saw in the Dirty Martini that I wanted to go ahead and swatch it out side by side. Again, the shimmers I feel like aren't really that strong, but yeah, it was close enough. I was like, you know what, let's go ahead and swatch it. But looking at the mattes, there were those tones in there that reminded me enough of the palette that I wanted to swatch it out just so you guys can see it side by side in case you were curious. But this is definitely maybe a little bit weaker, but still, you know, my criteria 4 to 5, this fit the bill, so we swatched it, and if you were curious how it compared, now you know. Next is Colored Raine's Safari Raine palette. This is a limited edition, and there were enough shadows that were similar enough. I was like, let's go ahead and swatch this out. And also too, if you miss the Safari Raine, maybe the Dirty Martini will give you those shadows that you liked about the Safari Raine, and it'll give you it in the Dirty Martini in case you missed out. I thought that'd be kind of cool if it was a discontinued product that, you know, gives the same vibes as the newer one. So that is why I'm swatching them out today. And there are those shades that are close, you know, with the green, the brown, you know. I feel like when you actually swatch them, the GlamLite Dirty Martini can swatch so very different than it looks, but looking at the palette dead on, you know, as I was going through last night, there was enough of a vibe of similarities of colored tones and color stories that I wanted to go ahead and swatch them out side by side so you guys could see when swatched exactly how they look like, because I feel like the Dirty Martini is very very sly when it comes to, you know, what it looks like in the palette and what it looks like when you actually create a look, but more on that later in my review. Next, another discontinued. This is the Try by Juvia's Place. Such a love of mine. My first like intro to green eyeshadow palette that absolutely had me falling in love with green eyeshadows. And yeah, it's a great palette, but I wanted to compare it to the Dirty Martini because once again, there were those shadows that really made me think of, you know, the Juvia's Place Try palette with the bright green and even some of the shimmery shadows in there, the dark green, the brown. So swatching it out side by side, maybe not a whole lot, but it's only a 9-pan palette. So I let it slide that there were only, what was it, 3 colors that really screamed out to me to be similar, but there were a couple that were close enough. I figured we'll swatch it out just so you guys can see side by side on camera what they look like. But that was another palette that came to mind when I was looking through my collection, was the Juvia's Place, the Tried palette. Another all green palette. This is BH Cosmetics Pistachio palette. Such a good palette. I think it's like goes in and out of stock, so I don't think it's fully discontinued. I'm not really sure where it stands though. So you may or may not be able to get it, but here is what it looks like, and then here it is compared to the Dirty Martini palette. I feel like the Dirty Martini palette definitely goes more grunge and more like foresty army type of green than the Pistachio palette. However, there are those shadows in the Pistachio palette that made me think of the GlamLite Dirty Martini, so I wanted to go ahead and swatch them out. And I was just curious, you know, when I saw the Dirty Martini being an all green palette that was almost like a blue green but had grunge in it, but still it just made me think of all those classic, my favorite all green eyeshadow palettes in my collection, and the Pistachio palette is definitely one of those when it comes to my favorite all green palettes. So I wanted to swatch them out so you guys can see for yourself and determine how close it is. But I thought, you know, vibe wise and, you know, kind of feel for it, you could see some similarities, but it definitely is leaning very much on the more blue green side of the Dirty Martini palette, and the Pistachio palette doesn't have any of that grunge that I really do like the Dirty Martini. So something to note. Okay, this is more for nostalgia reasons because when I was looking at and comparing them, I didn't really see that many similarities. However, it's the Melt Gemini palette. Like, how can I not swatch a new grungy all green palette next to like the OG grungy all green palette? And I mean, the Melt Gemini isn't even all green. It's got the warmth up here, but still, when we're talking about like grungy greens, Melt Gemini is a palette that comes to mind so very much. So I know there isn't a whole lot that is close in this palette when it comes to them. I mean, you know, even the shades that are similar that I'm swatching, I feel like are, you know, not super duper close. However, you guys know me. I like to swatch it just to see. And I feel like even though they aren't crazy close, there are those shades where I feel like if you had the Gemini palette, I feel like you could create a look or two that is inspired by the Dirty Martini palette because, you know, they're not super close. They're not dupes. You know, none of these palettes are dupes. However, they give off that same vibe, so you could create similar looks as you would with the Dirty Martini. But yeah, this was more of nostalgia because I felt like I couldn't not swatch it. Another palette that I felt like I just had to swatch is the Give Me Glow Juicy Olive palette. Kind of makes me, I mean, they're very similar. Juicy Olive, Dirty Martini, the whole theme of both palettes is very, very similar, but here are what they look like side by side. And when you actually get up close and look, I feel like when I was looking at this last night, there was only like one shade I was like, yeah, that's definitely not in there. And that's the Cocktails, the darker shade in the Give Me Glow palette, but all the other ones I feel like are pretty darn close. Again, I'm not going for dupes and with these swatches just to see how similar they are, and also for, as I said, comparison reasons, because I feel like GlamLite's formula when it comes to their mattes can be a little deceptive in the way that they apply on the skin and look in the pan. So these swatches are hopefully helpful for you guys to see them swatched on the skin next to shadows you might already own to see the comparison and, you know, be able to get a better feel for the palette. But yeah, that is the Juicy Olive palette. Such a great palette, such a love of mine. Okay, next up is this big massive hunker. I gotta put down the Dirty Martini palette for this, but this is the P. Louise Worldie palette. This palette is such a fantastic palette, but oh my goodness, is it massive? Okay, let me see see if I can hold this up here, and then we're gonna grab the Dirty Martini palette. Ugh, okay, here we go. So comparing these two together, I feel like you definitely, of course, have the greens, but even the blues had more of like the blue-green tone up here, and then it had more of like the olive tones down here. So there was enough, again, to, I feel like, warrant swatching the ones that were similar enough to the Dirty Martini out on my arm. I'm not gonna be swatching, obviously, the whole palette of the Worldie palette because it's a big color story. It ranges a whole lot more than the Dirty Martini palette, but the ones that are close enough, I definitely wanted to swatch out just so you guys can see. And I'm gonna go ahead and put this palette down because it is, oh my gosh, so heavy. But yeah, that surprised me because I pulled it out just to check it off, because whenever I do these comparison palette videos where I take a new palette and compare it to what I have, I pull out every single, unless it's like an all purple palette and I'm doing a green, I'm like, okay, I don't need to pull that one out. But anything else, like, I make sure I pull it out and just look at it to make sure I'm not missing a palette that might be similar enough. And this one, when I pulled it out and I was going through it, I was like, okay, Worldie palette, you're a little more similar than I thought, because it has those tones that remind me of the Gimme Glow. I mean, there's not a lot of shimmers anyway in the Worldie palette, but this was mostly for all of the mattes. So I figured I would just swatch the ones that were close enough in case you were curious. Okay, last up is going to be the Made by Mitchell Feet on the Ground palette, another big palette. I'm gonna fold it back. It's not as heavy as a Worldie, so I'm thankful for that. Anyway, this palette I feel like definitely was one of those palettes that, you know, popped to the top of my head when I was thinking about a comparison video and what I could swatch to compare, because this has a lot of the same vibes as the Dirty Martini. It has those greens, it has the grungy, you know, like brown greens even. It has, the shimmers are a little bit weak, but it has those tones that I felt like kind of gave me similar vibes to the Dirty Martini, with the more pinky tone one, the more champagne-y one, and then the bright green I feel like, I don't know, it's not that close to the Dirty Martini, but I'm still going to swatch it just in case you were curious. So definitely I wanted to swatch it out and show you guys what they look like side by side. But that is going to be my final comparison for the new GlamLite Dirty Martini palette. Okay, that was a lot of palettes. I feel like I just threw information at you. Now we're going to go ahead and segue into my review portion of this, and I'm just going to give you guys my overall thoughts and opinions on the Dirty Martini by GlamLite palette. I have used this 5 times. I plan to use it one more time to do more of a blue-green, but today I wanted to go really green for my review, so I'll be doing 6 looks total by the time you guys see this in a Palette-Palooza coming up soon. But I've used it a good bunch. I feel like I have a pretty solid opinion on this palette, and I want to share with you guys my thoughts in hopefully just a couple minutes before we get into the tutorial part of the video. So first up, like I kind of mentioned already in the comparison, I have a little bit of a critique to give, or not even critique, but just a warning to give any consumer who is looking at these palettes on their website or on their Instagram and thinking about buying them. I would definitely highly encourage you to kind of look around at YouTuber videos, specifically tutorials, to get a good feel for this palette. Because I feel like with this palette, the colors, well, they're not deceiving, and it's not like in a negative way. However, the formula of especially their mattes is very different when you actually go to put it on your eye. Because I remember the first look I did, I grabbed this brown, and it just looked like a brown to me. So it's like, okay, a brown. I wanted to go very brown and neutral because I wanted to see how not grungy green I could get a look. I just like to see versatility in a palette. So with this palette having a couple of those more neutral colors, I was like, okay, I could use these tones. And could I get a eye look that didn't look like it came from an all green palette? I put this on my eyes and it was green, like a dark green, and I was just like, wait, what? I totally thought I went into like this shade over here, but I was so confused for a couple seconds. However, I went and did the other eye, I made sure I went into the brown, and it looked a lot more green. So, I mean, not to say that it's a bad thing that it's, you know, showing up more green than it looks in the pan, but just from a consumer standpoint, when you were wanting to go buy something, when I saw this on the website, you know, the colors that I had in my mind tended to look a little bit different when I actually put them on my eyes, and especially with the shimmers, because the shimmers, I feel like I just talked about this in Menagerie's review, but the shimmers in here are beautiful. But I have the hardest time picking them up with a brush, and they look 10 times better if I can put them on with my finger, but I can't stand using my finger when it comes to applying shimmer shadows. So it's just this love-hate thing, because I do think they're very pretty, but if you want to get them as beautiful as they look in the pan, you have to really pile them on with a finger. I used a finger today, and I still feel like I could get a little more intensity to match what I see in the pan, but I just can't get the, I don't know, they're more of a, I would say GlamLite's shimmer formula is more like a subtle wash of color instead of like the intense pigment that you see in the pan, if that makes sense. Kind of like with this shadow here, it just looks so very bright and beautiful, but when you actually go to use it and, you know, put it on your skin or whatnot, or put it on your eyelid, I feel like it's just so much softer. Not to say it's not beautiful, but the color, especially when you're using it in a look, is a lot softer. It's got all the shine, so if you're someone who just likes sparkly shine, that's great. But if you're someone who's looking at these, seeing all these colorful shimmer shadows and wanting to see that color really stand out and pop in a look, it doesn't so much for me. I feel like all of my looks were more, the color that I was seeing in the pan was a lot more subdued on my eyes. Still sparkly, still very, shimmery, shiny, and shifty, but color-wise, it was very soft and toned down. And for me, I know I mentioned this before, if you are new to my channel, I'm someone who likes metallics and intensity in the colors, and sparkly and shifty stuff is kind of a bonus for me, but it's not what my preference is when it comes to shimmers and what I put on my lid. I think they're, sparklies are beautiful, but I just like intense color. And for me with these, having to use my finger, and if I wanted to use a brush, it was just like a no-go. And I'm someone who doesn't always, want to put down a cut crease and put down concealer to make them pop. I just found that a little bit annoying. So something to throw out there, their shimmer formula, I think is beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful when you swatch it. When I'm using it in eye looks, I don't enjoy the formula as much. Speaking about the mattes though, the mattes are really beautiful. I had no issues blending any of these mattes together. They were very pigmented, very intense. Like I said, they show up a little bit differently on your eyes than they do in the pan, but that's literally the only con, if you can even call it a con, the only con with the mattes, because the mattes were just gorgeous, stunning, so easy to work with, so blendable, so smooth to work with. Again, very intense when you put it on. It doesn't take any work to build up. The mattes were the star of the show by far for me with this palette. Alright, so at this point, all we have left to do is the tutorial portion of this video, but this is where I'm going to wrap up chit-chatting with you guys for this video, and I'm going to segue into the tutorials. It's just going to be music playing through as I do the tutorial. There's not going to be any talking or voiceover from me, so this is where I'm going to leave you guys, and then after the tutorial is done, I'll just kind of segue right into my end screen and close out the video from there. So yeah, it's a little weird to say goodbye to you guys here, even though the video still has a couple more minutes left, but I hope this video was helpful for you guys, and as I said, I'd really appreciate it if you could tell me which type of video you prefer. If it's more focused on the comparison palette, a short review, followed by a couple helpful tutorials for inspiration and whatnot, and just to see the palette in action and keep it short and sweet like that. Or do you like it focused on longer tutorials where I do a voiceover and I go through and review each and every shadow that I use as I'm using it on camera? Let me know that. Like I said, I'll leave my last review down in the description box if you want to pop over there and see how I did that video. You could compare it to how I did this video, and on either video, just let me know your preference, and that would really help me in knowing going forward what type of video you would like to see. So yeah, at this time, I'll go ahead and plug my Instagram account. If you want to follow me over there, I'm LadyKatie92, and I post reels, up close pictures of my eyes, all that sort of thing. So that's going to be over there. But yeah, let's go ahead and just kind of segue right into the tutorials and yeah, get some inspiration for the Dirty Martini palette.